The challenge is that you start schedule shooting in a place like Uti, you move on to a place like Mauritius, and then you come to a place like Bombay. You're shooting in all these various environments, but essentially you're telling the viewer, okay, no, this is one world. You're creating an illusion of consistency. And I think a lot about filmmaking is creating an illusion of consistency. You're lying in a convincing manner. That's essentially what the nature of the job is. You need it to be earthed. You need it grounded for it to become relatable. I don't believe people relate to absolute beauty. I think people relate to also defects, chaos, asymmetry, weakness, ugliness. The combination of beauty and ugliness, like Bombay is a very good example. It's a very interesting example of beauty and ugliness at very close proximity, and that gives it its character.
Right. Hello, my name is Ahona. I am in conversation with Nikos. Hi, thank you so much for joining us. So, I've been following your work for years, as I was just telling you, and you've worked through so many different genres. And I really want to know, do you have a favorite? Do you have a favorite genre?
I don't know anymore. I thought since I started working in this line of work, I thought the most intuitive thing for me was the sort of gritty, suspenseful kind of space.
Right.
It came very natural to me.
Right.
And it's very funny because a lot of the time people would approach me, even for commercials, like years back, and they would have to warn me, you know what, but you have to remember this is not a dark, mysterious, contrasty. And I was like, well, but that's the whole point. You're creating imagery which reflects the kind of content.
Right.
It's tailored to a content. It's not. But really, you don't know whether you have it inside you until you actually try it.
Right.
And it's very different to try to do a light look in a commercial.
Right.
Versus doing it on a movie where your main purpose is to try to evoke emotions.
Right.
So yes, if you follow for instance, my work in India, you'll see a lot of it is very dark,
noir-ish almost.
Especially the last film that I did with Dibakar Beyond Cash. It was noir. It was all about hard lighting, shadows, and it's almost in a way the exact antithesis of what I'm doing now, but not really. It is on one level it seems and it feels it's an exact antithesis, but it's not because it's also a graphic novel. It's also it also has some storybook aesthetic. So what you're essentially doing is you're changing the how heavy your content is and your language, but essentially it's building an image from scratch.
Right. So with Archies, because so many of us have a certain kind of idea of Archies, and the thing that you're saying is developing an image from scratch. When you're doing it for something like this, what are the thoughts that you have in mind that, this is how I have to go about something which people are sort of familiar with, but you're also building it from scratch?
Yeah, it's funny you ask that because actually in this particular case it is from scratch because as soon as I did not know Archie, I didn't happen to follow Archie when I was younger. So when I started looking at the actual comic book, I realized very quickly that it would be very difficult for us to not start from scratch. Like we had to do a very loose visual interpretation of the comic book. It was just the kind of colors, the kind of aesthetics of the comic is hyper real with very strong primary colors, which both Zoya and me felt would be very obtrusive in terms of making on a movie, trying to make the audience relate to the content and the story. That would be a little bit too much. Like it would get into a hyper real zone.
Right.
Because of the intensity of the colors, and you can get away with it in
a comic strip
like that. But I don't know if you can hold the viewer looking at like saturated green, red, and blue for like 2 hours.
Right.
You need to tone things down in order to be able to emotionally get emotionally invested into the characters.
Right.
So very soon we knew we would have to start from scratch.
Right.
Right. So that was a challenge, how to create a perceptual translation of the language of the comic into like a movie. And you have to take poetic license for that. And we did. Like Suzanne
Right.
came up with a beautiful palette of pastel colors
Right.
that were toned down, and they were good ground on which to found our
Sort of build upon
yeah,
the
storytelling.
idea.
Basically, so when I read the script, what mattered to me, the moment you have a screenplay in your hands, you have a story.
Right.
And it doesn't matter anymore the fact that it's Archie. Like it matters on a conceptual level. Okay, so the conceptual. So what you're getting from it is, okay, we're doing a storybook kind of film. It has
Right.
to have some picture perfect graphic novel elements. And how do we do this? And the challenge is, how do you do this without becoming a purpose that is distracting you from following a story and
Right.
investing yourself emotionally to
Right.
characters. So you shouldn't allow style to take over the narrative.
Right. Right.
So very quickly we realized that the challenge is to create that universe, which is
Right.
very difficult. You start from scratch, you create a universe, and within that universe, it has to become so instinctive that now you're presenting that world, but actually what you're essentially doing is you're telling a story, and you're more faithful to telling the story than to saying, okay, we're doing Archies, and now we have to be doing this world.
Right.
So that
Right.
becomes, let's say, it's like driving a car. It has to
Right.
once you've done the prep and you've realized what you're doing, it has to become instinctive, and then you have to focus. Or every question you have to ask yourself before shooting and lighting a scene is like, how is the viewer is supposed to feel when they see this shot, when they see this
Right.
sequence.
Right.
So it changes a lot from
With
prep
the
to shoot. Yeah.
right. Right. Of course. Yeah, and also because with comic books, I think one of the things about comic books is that we already have a certain idea of the framing, because it's
Yeah.
just so picturesque. But to translate it to moving
Yeah.
image like that would definitely be
Yeah, well, also in a comic book, you don't have a set frame ratio, right? Like on a
right.
movie theater, on your screen, you have like a 16 by 9 or like a 2:3:5:1 ratio. In a comic, you can have one frame where it's just one
Right.
character just
Right.
looking like this, and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
vertical. You
Yeah.
can't do that in a film. At least you can, but you would have to frame in a way that you're only allowing a small part of the frame to be
Right.
seen.
Right.
You have to come up with a different language. And for us, for instance, Zoe is a very big fan of Sam Rockwell. Some of his stuff, we felt, was very close to emotions that we're trying to portray. So we
Right.
used a lot of referencing in order to see like how potentially could we frame this.
Right. Right.
And you'll see in this film a lot of frames where people are sitting, but we can still see them from head to toe.
Right. Okay.
And then
Okay.
there's like a little dog.
Okay. Okay.
And this is something that is not like very. It's not an everyday grammar, but we adopted it in this film, and it worked quite nicely
Right.
in
Right.
creating a specific vibe.
A vibe. Yeah. Yeah. Because and also, I mean, Zoya and you have a certain kind of energy together, which is Made in Heaven was, of course, I mean, genre-wise, it was very different. But I'm also thinking that because this is such a curated set, and we always talk about the challenges of shooting in real locations, and I think generally the public are more aware of that aspect of it. Tell me about the challenges of shooting in a location like this. Like,
Are you talking about this particular set?
yeah, a set like this.
Heat. That's,
Right. Right.
I'll tell you what the challenge is. The challenge is that you start a schedule shooting in a place like Uti,
Right.
and you move on to a place like Mauritius, and then you come to a place like Bombay.
Right.
So you're shooting in all these various environments, but essentially you're telling the viewer, okay, no, this is one world.
Right. So there has to be a
And
consistency.
you're creating an illusion of consistency.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
a lot about filmmaking is creating an illusion of consistency. You're lying in a convincing manner. That's essentially what the nature of the job is.
Right.
So this is, I would say, the easiest part. Like there's no, like the moment you're on a set that you've built, and okay, you're not in Uti anymore, but you know, you have some chroma, and then you'll extend your set somehow
Right.
in post-production. You're actually free. If you ask me, the biggest restriction is when you're on location in Uti,
Right.
and you have to make it happen within the confinement of a space that if you pan the camera right, you just see modern civilization, and then basically 60s is this, and then you pan right a little bit, and all of a sudden you're in 2022.
Right.
You
Right.
know?
Right.
So I think that's more challenging. Also, you're bound to a very moody and temperamental weather in Uti,
Right.
which
Right.
you're not here. I mean, that's what I'm saying. If you ask me what's here, it's the heat. It's
Right.
really difficult for people to concentrate and give their best when it's
You know, when they're just,
so
yeah.
intense.
Right.
Uti was very pleasant in that way,
Right. Right.
but visually the weather was unforgiving. Like we
Right.
would get sun, clouds, rain within 5 minutes. We had
Right.
like three basically different light setups within like 15 minutes. It was insane. It was bipolar. So we had to
Right.
make it work. That was difficult for my department. At least it was very difficult, and
Right.
it was very frustrating for everyone else
Right.
because
Right.
you
Of
have to make
course.
people wait.
Yeah, yeah, true. But no, since you were talking about, you know, maintaining a kind of consistency, and this is set in the 1960s, it's releasing and catering to a certain kind of audience right now. So when you are, you know, sort of visually building a world like that or capturing a world like that, how much does the period sort of come into play in your mind when you're sort of framing the film that this is set in a particular time?
In terms of the viewers now, or in terms of how do you
Like, you
portray
know,
it?
how you portray the whole thing.
See, period, again, the problem with period is that you can't wing it. You can't say, okay, I'll go to set and I'll come up with an amazing idea.
Right.
Because everything that you're going to use has to be sourced specifically. So a lot of your creativity needs to be invested in prep.
Right.
And of course, you'll have some flexibility the moment you arrive on set, and then you see a beautiful set like this one. You say, oh, you know what, we didn't think about this, but we could put the camera in the corner and
Right.
we can create that vibe that we never anticipated when we're sitting in a sofa imagining how this is going to be.
Right.
But you can't all of a sudden say, okay, I want two cars outside. Because what kind of cars will they be? They can't be contemporary. So you
Exactly.
needed to have thought about it. The other thing with period is that it's an advantage. It's a style that's already been given to you. Like, you know,
Right.
and I love the 60s.
Right.
And the moment, and I feel there's something about period and that particular period, the way men and women dressed, the hairstyles, that even before I feel, even before I started doing any creative work, I'm looking at something beautiful in front of me.
Right. Right.
And if you add the beautiful design that Suzanne has brought on the table, uh, you start with a canvas that already has like amazing qualities in it. And if you add to that the music, which is also like 60s music is really
Right. Yeah. Rocking.
awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Also
like
music.
what else do you need? Like I feel in a sense my job is very easy in this film because
Right.
everything is already so beautiful. So
Right. Right.
it's spoiling me.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, but I mean, of course, because even when I was walking through this set and we did like a guided tour of it, it is so detailed, it looks so lived in. And that is something that I've specifically noticed in your work, that the worlds that you've captured, they look very lived in. They don't really look like, you know, pieces from a film. They're
Yeah.
part of reality. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, that's very interesting. I mean, this is the result of collaboration. Like the designer, the production designer, the set decorator, the way we will frame it. Everyone has to keep in mind that you're trying to create a very persuasive lie. Right.
right,
So everything has to be built around, let's say, a character. Like you're
right,
not just making a beautiful frame. You're not
right,
shooting a frame. You're shooting a movie. And detailing is important because I'll tell you exactly what I mean by that. you get a brief. Let's say I'm sitting with Zoya and we're saying, okay, that has to be like a storybook aesthetic, or like in Beyond Case, we're trying to create a graphic novel look.
Right.
That is, by definition, it's a bit hyper real, but real life is not like that. Real life
Right.
is full of chaos, and when you're talking about detailing, it's actually trying to see how you visually and practically merge these two without make them antagonists. Look,
Right.
so how can I introduce chaos into a frame and at the same time have a storybook picture perfect feel? The detailing for me has to do with this. A lot of the time you need to start introducing a little bit of chaos because otherwise it might get so hyper real that the viewer looks at it and says, okay, this is looking beautiful, but not necessarily evoking emotions.
Right.
And this is a very like a delicate balance. It's very difficult to communicate and tell you exactly how we do it. For me, it's instinct. And you know that when you work in a film, for instance, that doesn't have a huge budget, where you don't control too many things, and you realize how many beautiful things just happen in front of you that you haven't anticipated and that are beyond your control.
Right.
And all of a sudden, you're in a place where you can control every little detail. And then what I'll do is I'll try to just step back and think of all the moments that I didn't have an option and what beautiful things, chaotic, beautiful things happened that I could not
Right.
have anticipated. And then try to introduce a little bit of chaos into the mix because you need it to be earthed, you need it grounded
Right.
for it to become relatable. I don't believe people relate to absolute beauty. I think people relate to also defects and little asymmetries. Like you're trying to create symmetry and balance in a frame. I think people also respond to chaos, asymmetry, weakness, ugliness. Like the combination of beauty and ugliness. Like Bombay is a very good example of it.
Right.
It's a very interesting example of beauty and ugliness at very close proximity, and that
Right.
that gives it its character.
Right. True. True. Yeah. So, before we wrap up, I'd really like to ask you, because I know that you'd have a very different perspective on this, because we see films from a certain perspective almost, and because you're working behind the camera in that sense, what are the films that where you really, really liked the cinematography? Like, it could be anything.
Like Indian films.
Indian films, films abroad, it could be anything. Like, if there are films that you'd recommend to people that, yeah, the cinematography here was something that really impressed me, what films would you think of?
This is a very hard question because there's such a huge pool. I would, but if I had to say, I would say, see, everyone says contemporary work. There's so much content being produced, beautiful content being produced right now. Uh, so, I mean, everybody has seen everything. I think people are getting desensitized to visuals just by being exposed so much. Everybody has access to high quality still cameras. You go on Instagram and you're seeing beautiful work every day. It used to be like a jewelry. Like if you wanted to go and see good pictures, you had to go to a gallery and see art. And now just like follow 10 photographers on Instagram and I'm just seeing beautiful images every day.
Right.
So the only thing I could say is that look at things that are scarce, things that are not in abundance, because everything else you've seen. So I would go back in time and I would look at imagery at the time where it was not that much abundant and
Right.
like older films, older
Right.
cinematographers. Not because they're better, it's more beautiful, but because it's something that is not seen. And it's something that I miss. I think that, for instance, cinematography is becoming too naturalistic. And if you look at films before technology allowed us to shoot with such sensitive cameras that we can capture even darkness, like there's cameras now that you can shoot in the moonlight,
Right.
and that's beautiful. But you're painting less.
Right.
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 So back then they had to introduce so much that I think it's very interesting for anyone who's interested to see what people came up with when they had to paint every single element in the frame, because
Right.
otherwise it wouldn't be exposed. So I would
Right.
go back to the 60s, 70s, even like 50s, and
Right.
black and white photography. But I don't know, like if a contemporary, not very contemporary, there's just too many things. I don't know which one to start with, to be honest. I love, for instance, the work Dickens did in The Man Who Wasn't There, black and white movie for
Right.
Penn Brothers, like a long time back. Um, Seven
Oh yeah.
has
Yeah.
cinematography too. But you see, I'll always come up with something that's like
Right. Right.
a long time back. Not because there's not good work now, but because I feel that there's more lighting and there's more emphasis in the craft of lighting. If you go back to the time when people, for instance, shot film, and they had to do some intense lighting in order to just even expose their frames.
Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
But I would go even further back in time, and like the beginning of color cinematography,
Right.
Technicolor, when they had 5 ISO, and you know, people like Jack Cardiff, who used to light with a camera that was the size of like a little truck, like a big table,
Right.
and the camera, the negative was so slow that they had to make even like a very dark scene. They had to put so much light that you would blind your eyes, and you look at it, and the images look like paintings.
Right. Right.
You know,
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah. interesting.
interesting things.
Yeah, yeah. So thank you so
You're
much.
welcome.
Yeah, this was wonderful. Yeah, and I'm sure that anybody who just, this last part that you said, it's something that's now becoming very rare. So I really hope people go out and explore those things. So yeah, thank
It's all
you.
for everyone.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much. Thank you.